I'm Kate Gerrul. I'm a third-year medical student at Washington University in St. Louis.
I'm Maren Loe. I'm a third year MD PhD student at Washington University in St. Louis.
Welcome to episode 18 of the MD Edge Post Call podcast. In this episode, we return to our conversation with the founders of 500 Women in Medicine, Kate Gerrul and Maren Loe. Kate and Maren partnered together with colleagues and mentors to create a network for women in medicine, a pod of 500 women scientists. You can find links to contact them and follow them on social media and become part of 500 Women in Medicine in the podcast notes. You can also find our contact information. We encourage you to email us with feedback on the show, suggestions for topics or guests, as well as anything that you'd like to share and possibly have your email read in a future episode. And now we return to part 2 of my conversation with Maren and Kate. All right, so I want to switch gears and get to know you two a little better. This podcast is sort of after hours. We talk about like things outside of just work and like your career. It is what you are third year students. Did I remember that correctly? Third or fourth?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you at in terms of starting to narrow down what you want to do specialty wise, research wise, and how are you at the point now where answering that question has really become annoying?
I am 6 months into my PhD. My PhD is in system science and mathematics, which is in the engineering department here. I've done most of my research this far on neuroscience, on computational neuroscience. And from a mathematical perspective, I really love the brain. I love the complexity. I love modeling different systems, and I love how much there is still left for us to learn. I don't know what I want to do clinically. The more I see, the more unsure I am. I feel like there are so many great things about so many different specialties that I'm just going to have to wait and see what happens when I go back to clinic after my PhD.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm in clinic now. I'm in the MD only track. So I see patients all day on the floor now. I'm about halfway through my third year. So I've now decided that I'm going to pursue a career in orthopedic surgery, which I knew I wanted to be a surgeon when I came to medical school. I've absolutely loved the OR every single time I've been in it. So it was a difficult decision in terms of what type of surgery I wanted to practice, but I just completely connected with orthopedics and the carpentry, the tools you get to use, all of it is fantastic. And I think that mobility and pain are both really interesting issues. A lot of my research work has actually focused on gender equity in surgery. Both Maren and I are in the research lab of Dr. Argavan Salas. She's a minimally invasive surgeon here at WashU. And so both of us have done some really interesting research about visibility for women physicians in conference speaking roles, which in some ways kind of informed our decision to start this nonprofit. And then also looking at evaluations and looking at kind of gender differences and how faculty are evaluating residents. And Maren's now applying that to how faculty evaluate students. So I think ultimately I do want to spend a large chunk of my research career, at least, studying gender equity as it plays out in surgery.
So within, you mean gender equity within the professional aspect of your career, not necessarily in dealing with patients. You're talking about how faculty is related to clinicians, et cetera, and on down the line. Okay.
Right. A lot of the way that people are evaluated depends on like the written comments that faculty will write about students. And we know from other areas, from business, mostly from business, that those like performance evaluations can be extremely gendered. And people will talk a lot about, in venture capital, how brilliant the man is, or how he's going to be a great leader. But then they'll talk about, like oh, the woman is surrounded by like a really good team of people. So like maybe we should invest in her because like the people she's with are a really good team. So it's an interesting area. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's something that that I choose to do above and beyond kind of like my PhD work.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that. 'Cause I started my career in sports broadcasting and sports media before I had a change of heart and didn't want to do that anymore. But this issue was really big in football with regard to race, where the white quarterback would be described as this way and the black quarterback would be described as this way. And the subtleties of the differences are very sort of weird and microaggressive and like the implications are strange. It doesn't make them not factual. It just is almost inappropriate what's being highlighted.
Yeah.
Right. So like you like Russell Wilson being described as escapable. That's like a bestial way to describe a person, despite being a hardworking master's degree smart guy. But Peyton Manning is described as smart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one example in medicine is a lot of our Asian female classmates will get feedback. And I mean, this is anecdotal from just talking to people, but they'll say, oh yeah, you know, they told me I need to speak up. They told me I'm too quiet. And, you know, it's not usually the white men who receive those comments in their evaluations. So
I think that's also the power of qualitative research, is applying rigorous research techniques that have, you know, this track record and this history to these things that we've observed anecdotally. So, you know, we observed that the way people were describing their experiences were different and the feedback they were receiving. So we chose to investigate this question and apply research methodology to the things we were observing, and then we're able to come to scientific conclusions about things that we had observed.
That's interesting. So how, if you're coming to a conclusion from something that began with, I guess, a collection of observations, does the conclusion lead you to a place where there's like an actionable end, or is this sort of just a conclusion to build like a building block?
So we saw these things kind of playing out and chose to ask a research question where we gathered hundreds of written evaluations about surgical residents. And then we applied rigorous qualitative methodology through this method called grounded theory to, in a blinded fashion, look at the comments that men and women surgical residents received. So we didn't know the gender of the person who was being evaluated. We just saw the evaluation in like completely unbiased form. So Maren and I would code those evaluations, and then we eventually came up with a theoretical model that explained those findings and tried to, you know, create this paradigm or this sense of why we thought those things were happening and explain what we were seeing in these evaluations.
I think the next step is, though, how can we address this so it doesn't continue to happen? A lot of the gender equity, racial disparity type research out there identifies problems. So we know there are all of these problems. There's not a lot of work being done on how to solve them, and like evidence-based solutions to these problems. So I really think that's the way that we need to start pushing that research. Sure. Definitely. And it's something that we're thinking about on the project that I'm working on with Dr. Solis right now. And it's something that we're hoping that 500 Women in Medicine will be able to help with from the promotion side of gender disparities.
I find myself motivated when I hear things like these, because for so much of it, I choose to believe or hope to believe that a lot of it has to do with a huge group of people who are majority left brain scientific and have been in the hierarchy for a long time and haven't taken a lot of time to really study word choice and how to communicate ideas in the same way that someone like me in media or an advertising firm would. And the example that comes to mind is, and I don't know if either of you saw this on Twitter, recently there was a billboard in Savannah, Georgia, that had the three surgeons, and they had their masks on. And upon further research, if you look into it, the anecdote is that there's a lot of obesity in Savannah. The patients are turning down the surgery. So the surgeons thought, well, we want to show them that we're normal people. That billboard that said this is all cardiothoracic surgeons look like this had a sister billboard where they were in street clothes. And you think it's a really great idea. Show the people that you're just a person. But it was so bad that implying that all cardiothoracic surgeons are white men between 40 and 60. Like a 20-minute phone call with an advertising agency would have prevented this and did a much better job. So I think that I suspect that in medicine there are a lot of instances where someone is intending not to be that way, and just by metacognition on your word choice and the messaging you're trying to get across, and really thinking about those kind of things, that kind of messaging can be avoided.
I think it really speaks to the importance of diversity on teams in general. Like if they had, on that particular team, a diverse group of people looking at that, they might have spotted a problem potentially. Sure. So I think it also speaks to the importance of creating diverse teams, and the fact that diverse teams do make better decisions in the long run.
So it's Friday night, and it's freezing outside all across America. But what do you guys do when it's time to shut your brain off for a little bit, blow off steam? I know that there's a lot of camaraderie in medical school. You see some friends. I don't know if you're into dating apps or if you play sports or what the deal is in med school these days. But if you could just give me some insight into when you have like 72 hours or 36 hours to not do anything, what do you do?
Yeah, I played volleyball in college, so I still try and get to a couple open gyms. Sure. I run and bike now mostly, and I really like to cook and bake. So, yeah, eating and exercising off what I've eaten.
So it's a never-ending cycle, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if you've been to St. Louis before, but we have this really great park, essentially between the medical campus and the main campus. And it's just like a great place to be outside and have nature while you're still in the city.
Sure, like put your earbuds in and just kind of walk around and see what you feel, see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great like free events. Our museums are free in the park. So.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
How good a cook are you? How'd you learn?
I mean, I helped my parents cook a lot. I have 3 sisters, and we all, played sports and were active. So we definitely ate a lot. And my dad would cook really big meals on the weekend. And so I liked helping out with that. But I moved off campus after my first year of undergrad and kind of had to learn.
Yeah,
so.
You can only have frozen corn dogs so many days in a row before it gets real weird.
Yeah.
Oh, college.
Yeah, those are the days.
Yeah, I also love to cook, like Maren. We like to get together and cook periodically. But I also really enjoy trying new restaurants. I'm from Seattle originally, and we used to love to go out in Seattle. And so moving to St. Louis was a big move because it's a much smaller city and we didn't know about the food scene, but we've been very pleasantly surprised. So my husband and I love to go out and try all the new restaurants in St. Louis, and we try to do that at least once a week.
Yeah, St. Louis is a really interesting food city because it's sort of in the crossroads of a couple different food cultures. You've got like the Kansas City, the barbecue, but there's a little bit of like a Rocky Mountain beef scene, and then there's some Southern fried kind of stuff. There's a lot going on. St. Louis is an underrated food city for sure. I definitely second your opinion there for sure.
Yeah, we have a lot of really good breweries too.
Yes, I have heard. Yeah, I've heard those are a really great time.
I didn't drink beer before I came to med school. Well, I had, but didn't like beer.
I always used to tell people that if you don't like beer, you just haven't tried enough. There's one out there for you, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So looking ahead, I don't want to point this out to you, but 500 Women in Medicine doesn't seem like an appropriate title anymore, because it looks like there's quite a bit more than 500. What's the end game? What is this nonprofit, I guess, I don't want to say company, but almost movement or network going to look like in 10 years?
Well, I think the name definitely has caused some confusion, but it's really rooted in the fact it's really rooted in our parent organization, which is 500 Women Scientists. Mm-hmm. So our parent organization started in 2016, actually as a petition to support women in scientific disciplines. And they sent out this petition with a goal of getting 500 signatures. And they ended up collecting 500 signatures within the first few hours of putting this petition out in the world. And I think that our name, the 500, really speaks to this overwhelming network and response to these initiatives that we really wanted to continue to honor with our name as well, and saying that we're going to put this out there and that the response has just been overwhelming. So really honoring that with the 500.
That makes sense. The sort of brand awareness and the uniformity. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in 10 years, I think we really hope that our database is a critical resource that people really look to as a premier place to find women speakers and women sources and women experts for various things. And we also hope that we have a robust community network of women physicians and women in STEM across the country and even across the world. 500 Women Scientists has community pods across the entire world, more than 600 worldwide. And one of our major efforts this year is going to be integrating women physicians into these existing community pods to really build that cross-disciplinary camaraderie and connections. So we also hope that we are able to create meaningful local networks for women in STEM and medicine.
So 10 years, let me see if I could do my math right. Kate will be late fellowship, right? Yep. He's still in training most likely. And Maren will be MD, PhD. You'll be out of that for 2 or 3 years, I think, if I'm doing my math right.
I'll be right? Like 2 or 3 years into residency.
Yeah, you'll be. Yeah, so that's a very exciting, but also I'm imagining a little grim and ironic way to look at things. Still be in college in 10 years.
Yeah. It's a long haul, but it'll be worth it.
Well, I hope so, right? Here we are.
That's what I tell myself.
Yeah, I imagine. So as we look forward to the growth of this network and like the things getting together, what advice do you have for people who want to get involved, who are your, I won't say age, but level of, are still in medical school or residency or fellowship, a young trainee type people? What do you say to men who want to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, we are looking to expand. We're looking for people to get involved on our subcommittees as we're working to really grow the network. And then for men, we are definitely going to be focusing on having an allyship. Women in medicine do more mentoring of women in particular, but in general do more mentoring because a lot of women end up seeking out women mentors. And so, including men in the sponsorship and mentorship of other women is going to be really important for us moving forward. And so we would love to add them to our network of allies.
So mentorship is really interesting to me because it's not a concept that I knew about when I started in medical media. And I think that the two things that if I were in the shoes of a trainee, that I would want a mentor who has the science and technique, say if I'm a surgeon, like the technical aspect of clinical medicine. But I would also, not necessarily a separate person, but perhaps a separate person to mentor me through things like academics, speaking, climbing up the ladder, how to work-life burnout, that kind of stuff. And what do you guys provide in terms of both of those? You want to women to be in higher leadership roles and get your footing here and make sure that the statistics balance out, but also there's physician suicide is epidemic, burnout is epidemic. There are real challenges that every day physicians deal with and struggle with at a really high level. So I when I was thinking about what mentorship would be like, I kind of thought of those two separate categories, and I imagine that this sort of thing would help with both of those.
Yeah, I think you're really speaking to the point of networks and the importance of making connections, and whether that's cross-disciplinary or people within your own institution, I think that mentorship is critical. And like you said, it doesn't have to be the same person for all of those roles, but finding people to share these experiences with is incredibly important. And we hope to, eventually facilitate that.
All right. So this is the end of the interview portion. I always give people a chance to say anything that you wished I would have asked, or anything that's like left unsaid. This is a time to just kind of spit it out. I found that if I just ask people to say what they want to say, I find that I didn't ask the appropriate questions.
I guess the one thing that I really like that we're partnered with 500 women scientists, because I think a lot of the things that women in medicine face are similar to the things faced by women in science. And they're not the same for sure. And that's why we wanted to address this need in medicine. But as an MD PhD student, I've seen, how a lot of these things are similar. My mom is a mathematician and was a woman hired by her department. And so I got to see a little bit on the personal side of what that looks like to be, one of the first. And so I think, learning from each other and working together is going to be really important. Definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure. Kate, anything that you'd like to say?
I think that we'd really like everyone to know in the medical community that they're more than welcome to get involved. We would love to have as many people involved with this movement and with our subcommittees as we can. For people who are interested in getting more involved with our organization, they can absolutely join a subcommittee. You can find the subcommittee sign-up form on our website, which is www.500womeninmedicine.org. And you can also follow us on Twitter. We're at 500WIM. And so we really hope that the medical community chooses to engage with us and chooses to become active participants in our organization as we really try to create meaningful change. It's going to take a lot of voices. And so anyone who's interested in this work, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and all of that information that you just mentioned there, we will include in the podcast description, in the notes, and the accompanying website article. It'll all be available. And so if anybody listening wants to get involved, it'll just like tap of your finger, click of your mouse kind of thing. It'll be right at the bottom there. Thanks, guys. So before we go, I always give people the opportunity. You can give someone a shout out, or maybe a mentor or someone who inspired you, kind of a personal thing. I think, Maren, you kind of did that. But this is just a time to just give a shout out to somebody if you want.
I think we'd also like to shout out the other 3 medical students who helped us found this organization. So Jane Hayes, Tam Sanchez-Ortiz, and Iris Kuhl. And then our 2 faculty mentors, Dr. Victoria and Dr. Arga Gonzalez.
That all sounds great. Ditto to what Maren said. We couldn't do this without our core team.
And that concludes episode 18 of the MD Edge Post Call podcast. We'd like to thank Kate and Maren for hanging out with us and spending some time to talk about their 500 Women in Medicine movement and the future of the network. For MD Edge, I'm Nick.